Today's episode of Theoretically Speaking features David W. Miller, CEO of Genesis Research Group. In this conversation, we'll be discussing how biotechs can navigate evidence generation, market access, and stakeholder engagement more efficiently, and why flexible integrated partnerships are reshaping the way life sciences companies bring innovation to patients. Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation, so let's get right into it.
Great.
I understand Genesis Research Group has been supporting U.S. and ex-U.S. clients in the life sciences industry for over 15 years. Can you provide a brief introduction of the company?
Sure, happy to. So we've been in business for a while, and we've learned a lot over those 15 years in terms of what our clients are looking for from an efficiency or an adaptability perspective. We have over 200 researchers, analysts, and scientists. And basically, we provide strategic guidance and operational support in HEOR, RWE, and market access. We have a variety of ways we engage with our clients. I think particularly noteworthy is our FIT engagement, which stands for Flexible Integrated Team, and I can get into this a bit later if you'd like, but it's an innovative way that we provide an array of expertise to our clients, and it's particularly suited to our biotech clients.
As we've heard, Genesis Research Group has a wealth of experience in providing solutions for the life sciences sector. Now, turning our focus to biotech specifically, you work with 19 out of the top 20 pharma companies around the world, but also a growing number of small to mid-sized biotechs. What makes these smaller companies' challenges fundamentally different from those of larger pharma clients?
Yeah, what's interesting about working with biotechs and contrasting that with, a large pharmaceutical company is the external dynamics are the same, right? They're trying to develop products and trying to develop a set of value evidence to address payer needs and other stakeholder needs. There's no difference, in a biotech product and a product coming out of a pharmaceutical company with respect to what the demands for evidence are. And other sorts of strategies. What's different about biotech is that, they're smaller. And when I say biotech, I'm talking about sort of clinical and commercial stage biotechs. Right? They're smaller and they're resource constrained. Typically, sometimes they're still burning investor money. And so they have to be very conscious of the money that they spend and make sure that they're getting an ROI. Their speed is real focus, right? They're, again, if they're burning investor money, getting the product in the market as fast as they can is really critical. And they're smaller. They don't have the internal expertise. They just haven't been able to afford to internalize a lot of internal expertise. Sometimes you see biotechs who have this kind of fragmented strategy going on because, they're focused on regulatory milestones as a focus, right? And sometimes that gets overweight in terms of their development program. And you need to make sure that sort of there's a focus on commercial and market access as well, that we often, come in and try to deal with. So they've got some specific kind of idiosyncrasies in biotechs, despite the fact that, what they're driving for is very similar as compared to a large pharmaceutical company.
That makes sense. And given these unique challenges that you were mentioning that smaller biotechs face, the pressure to demonstrate value quickly becomes even more critical, especially with some of those resource constraints that you mentioned. So how does Genesis Research Group help these companies quantify and demonstrate value early in their development?
Yeah, so early is important, right? You don't want to wait too long to begin to think about that. And that's sometimes a risk within biotech companies. Because oftentimes biotech companies, they've got a real science grounding, right? They've come out of an academic lab or something like that. And so it takes a while for them to transition from a research company into one that's starting to think about commercial success. And we can help them do that. This is something I think Genesis is particularly skilled at in helping make that transition from research to clinical to commercial. And we do things like help them think through their value framework early on, right? right? What's the value proposition for this product? Look at their clinical trials, right? And think about what sort of evidence they're going to get out of the clinical trials, what sort of gaps they'll still have, and how we can fill those gaps with other sorts of sources of data. Think about what payers are going to view, how payers are going to view this product, right? We have a product called Rapid Payer Response, where we can go out to payers very quickly and get some insights that can inform, their clinical trial strategy or other sorts of clinical and commercial strategies. And then we also help them pull together an evidence strategy. As I mentioned earlier, one of the risks that biotechs run into is they get a little fragmented with respect to the development strategy. There's in big pharmaceutical companies, you've got a program team that's kind of pulling all of this together and making sure that everybody's marching step by step. In biotech, you don't have that sort of.
Get all over the place.
Yeah, it's all over the place, right? And sometimes things get a little out of whack. There's too much focus on regulatory. There's too much focus on, some of the clinical data or something like that. And so we help them pull together an evidence strategy and try to bring these pieces together so that everybody begins to march, in the same step towards the finish line.
Got it. And building on that earlier discussion of value demonstration, you quickly mentioned about your FIT engagement model. And I know you said that FIT stands for Flexible Integrated Teams. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how they work and how this approach better addresses biotech pain points compared to traditional consulting models?
Yeah, so the FIT model essentially allows, at a high level, allows a biotech access to all sorts of different expertise that Genesis has through one engagement, one contract, right? So, and maybe the best way to describe it is give an example, right? So we work with a small biotech right now who's developing a product for a rare pediatric condition. They have asked us to do things like, through the FIT engagement, they've asked us to do things like help them design their clinical trial, right? So we had some HEOR experts look at their clinical trial and think about what sort of evidence they can get out of this trial. They also asked us for help with some of the patient-reported outcomes that they're going to put into the clinical trial. So we've got a PRO expert, right? And they were engaged in for a while in terms of their PRO strategy. At one point, they asked us, look, we have to think about the different presentations that we're going to present to the market, the different formulations and things like that. And that got into sort of a U.S. channel distribution strategy question. And so we tapped into our U.S. distribution channel expert, right? All through this FIT contract. So they didn't have to sort of set up a separate contract to think about PROs or a separate contract to think about their HEOR strategy, right? We could do this all through the FIT and just kind of plug and play different skill sets as their needs arose. And that's how the FIT model works.
So it's just an incredibly streamlined approach.
Exactly. It's very efficient for the client in a time perspective because they don't have to, go through a contracting process every time they've got a new set of questions. Mm-hmm. And it's very cost efficient, right? Because we can run this all through one contract for them. It's very economical for the client as well.
And in the context of that FIT model and its benefits, we know that some biotechs often struggle with the shift from clinical development to commercialization, which I know you mentioned a bit earlier on as well. What are the common challenges that biotechs face in this transition, and how does your team approach to help mitigate these obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, as I touched on earlier, the typical scenario is they're a science-based company that's trying to make this transition into a clinical mindset and a commercial mindset, and think about, rather than the molecular biology of the disease, right? They're thinking about trying to think about patients now. Now they're starting to think about revenue and commercial success, right? And so we help them in that transition. Help them with their clinical trial design. We can do studies that help them understand the patient journey. For example, articulate the disease and the epidemiology of the disease, which helps them understand the market. We can do patient work to understand kind of the patient burden of the disease. We begin to understand kind of the economic proposition for their product and how what the value proposition for this product is and what sort of evidence they're going to need to generate to support that value proposition. So we basically are helping them transition through these different phases that they're going through by bringing in our expertise in clinical and in market access and HEOR.
And as we look to the future, it's clear that biotechs face new opportunities and challenges. What emerging trends do you think will create the biggest opportunities and challenges for biotechs, and how is Genesis positioning itself to respond to these?
One of the things that we're particularly skilled at, that we see a lot of working with biotechs. Biotechs are often working in rare diseases, for example, or in oncology, and one of the things that we are really good at is helping them if they want to set up a single arm study, right? Oftentimes, rare disease are sort of prone to doing single arm studies, or oncology as well. And so they set up a single arm study. They've got sort of regulatory approval to do that. We help them with external control arms. So this is a trend, right? There's a real kind of growth in the use of external control arms, both from a regulatory perspective to help kind of understand, what impact this drug is actually having, right, compared to an untreated population, right? From sort of a clinical perspective, but also from a value perspective. You can use ECAs also to sort of tease out the economic value of a product between a treated population and an untreated population. So we can sit down with them and say, okay, here's how you design an external control arm for regulatory purposes, and maybe they've already done that. They've gotten approval from the regulatory authorities to do that. But we can also say, okay, here's what you can get out of that from a value perspective, right? With maybe a little bit different analytics or some different data coming from it, et cetera. So that's a real trend and something that, again, I think differentiates Genesis from some of our other competitors.
Got it. And what about technological integration? I know you guys leverage platforms like UVID and AI, I think, is the huge topic of conversation right now.
Yeah. So we've got several tech products, right, that we're using to make things more efficient. Our rapid payer response that I mentioned earlier, where we get rapid payer insights on behalf of our clients, is a tech platform that we use that allows very quick payer questions to be answered and insights to be generated. We also have a product called EVIT, which helps us sort of synthesize all the available literature around the disease or a product. It's basically a high-tech way of doing a systematic literature review. It takes a lot of kind of labor out of that process, right? It pulls data together, it simulates data, et cetera. And oftentimes biotech companies need to do this. They need to kind of get a lay of the land in terms of the disease, the product, other treatments for the disease, the epidemiology, et cetera. And we can apply EVIT to make that a very efficient process. And then within Genesis itself, we're using AI throughout our own processes as we think, develop strategies and do other sorts of work on behalf of our client that makes our jobs efficient, and then we pass those efficiencies on to our clients.
Incredible. And just one more, I guess, quick question, just out of curiosity. Is there any specific or different adaptations that you guys have had to make with the changes in the HTA and JC regulation?
Well, look, ultimately, that's what we're helping our clients drive towards. Sometimes we have to spend some time reminding them, right? That's what they're driving towards, because again, oftentimes they've got a regulatory kind of mindset, and I don't blame. It's not like I blame biotechs for having a regulatory mindset, because oftentimes their investment profile is based on filing an IND and getting the first patient into a clinical study, et cetera. These kind of regulatory milestones opens them up for more investment. So I'm not, that's the way the world works. But because of that, oftentimes we have to remind them that there's another set of goalposts that they're driving towards, which are HTAs. The issue often that we have is that, as you mentioned, these things are dynamic, right? They're changing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we can leverage is, again, our rapid payer response product, where we can understand changes in HTA systems. We can understand kind of what that means for our clients by going out to payers and ex-payers who are very kind of up to date in some of the changes that are happening, and get immediate insights from that. So it's something that, the goalposts are constantly moving. We have a job to keep up with that and make sure that that's conveyed to our clients, and our strategies are consistent with those changes. Again, it's something I think Genesis is very, very skilled at.
And I think that's incredibly valuable to the biotech team as well, because doing that sort of research would be not only a significant time lift, but also cost lift as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's very efficient for them to use that sort of facility that we have, and it takes a lot of risk out of their development program to keep current with sort of what's happening in the HTA world, and making sure we've got the right evidence at the end of their program to submit. So it's a big cost and time saver for them.
And I know currently real-world evidence has been sort of a major buzzword within the industry. Do you mind speaking quickly to the role of real-world evidence pre- and post-launch, and how Genesis supports this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, real-world evidence support is a real strength of Genesis, and again, something that differentiates us from some of our peers. The need for it continues to grow, and sort of the application of real-world evidence continues to grow. Again, if you're talking about biotechs, they're often doing single-arm studies, and we can apply real-world evidence in terms of data that is coming from a disease registry or other sorts of sources as an external control arm, right, to help them from a regulatory and a value perspective. We can use real-world evidence pre-launch to characterize the patient disease and the patient burden of the disease, and understanding kind of where in a patient journey as they go from diagnosis into some sort of disease state, where the intervention, the drug in this case, is going to add the most value, by again looking at some sources of real-world data. So there's a lot of application of real-world data pre-launch, and then post-launch. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, again, companies, if they've gone through an accelerated approval process for a rare disease or an oncology indication, they will get a post-marketing requirement instilled by a regulatory authority, where they have to kind of follow patients over some period of time just to ensure that the product is safe and efficacious, because they've probably approved it on a limited data set. We often work with our biotech clients in those post-market requirement studies to extract additional value information from those data. These are real-world data because they're simply following patients, who are using the drug and collecting some data on them. And we've guided clients in terms of additional data they could be collecting in those sorts of studies, or looking at the data they already are collecting, and helping them think through how they can extract some additional value out of those data, in addition to meeting the regulatory requirement. So there's lots of applications of real-world data and analytics of real-world data that occur pre-launch and post-launch, and where Genesis has a particularly skilled team to support it from an operational perspective, that is, doing the analytics, et cetera, and from a strategic perspective in terms of designing studies and thinking through data that should be collected and how those data would be analyzed and presented to the marketplace.
And do you have a team that actually supports with that additional evidence generation as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's one of the largest teams we have at Genesis. So these 200 people, one of the largest teams we have are people who focus on real-world data and real-world data analytics. And sometimes those teams are employed through our FIT model, particularly when it comes to data analytics. But oftentimes they're employed in other ways as well, and engaged in other ways with our clients. But it is one of the biggest teams we have at Genesis, is the team who focuses on real-world evidence strategy and real-world data analytics.
It sounds like your team has a really remarkable breadth of sort of offering within the real-world evidence space. Do you mind providing an example to show how you've supported a biotech in the past?
Yeah, so look, we worked with a biotech who wanted to supplement their clinical data with some real world data, but they didn't. They were a small company; they didn't have a team of experts, and so we sat down with them. And the first thing we did was assembled our FIT team, which had a team of some epidemiologists, some statisticians, and some strategists, and looked at what they had in terms of their clinical data, and then looked at kind of what was out there in terms of real world data that we could get access to, and help them kind of supplement some of the value data that they needed to supplement, in addition to their clinical trial data. And then we identified those data sources. We designed a study. Once we had access to those data, we designed a study to analyze those data, because even if you're analyzing data, you still have to put a protocol together, right? You've got to kind of understand what your analytic plan is, et cetera. You can't just kind of go at it haphazard. So we designed a study with them, again, using our epidemiologists and our scientists and analysts, and then executed against that study in terms of analyzing those data, and then produced publications and abstracts from those data that sat very nicely alongside their clinical trial data in terms of further articulating how this drug was going to have impact on these patients with this very serious disease. The client loved it because it was a program of work that, again, we executed through our FIT model, all the way from finding the data to designing the study to executing the study to publishing the data. That was all executed through our FIT model. So again, we could plug and play the right experts at the right time, and we got it out alongside their clinical trial data, which was a very powerful message in the marketplace.
Especially probably to supplement the commercialization strategy as well, having not only that clinical data.
100%, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. And I know sometimes this data can be a bit hard to come by. Are there any specific strategies or tools that Genesis has to employ to address that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, one of the beauties about Genesis is we're data agnostic, so we're not a data provider, right? We don't own data. We don't make money off of data. We make money off of applying our resources to data that exist. And so we're often asked by our clients, can you help us find the data to answer this question or to address this program of work? And we have a whole systematic way of doing that in terms of sourcing data and finding the right source of data on behalf of our clients. And some places it's hard to find these data. The U.S. kind of is awash with data. Outside the U.S. it's more difficult, but we have lots of experience finding these data, both prospective data and retrospective data, in Europe and beyond, that will address our clients' needs. And as I say, we have a very systematic way of approaching this, and we can do this from a data agnostic perspective because we have no skin in the data game. We're just trying to answer the client's question,
which I think is a very important distinction. So thank you for sharing that, David.
You're welcome.
Great. Are there any last final comments that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think as we're talking about the uncertainty in the marketplace right now, it seems like there's been a particularly high injection of uncertainty over the last number of months in the biotech and pharmaceutical space. Biotechs, to be very honest with you, have been struggling a little bit since the pandemic with respect to investment. What's interesting about that is that biotechs with clear assets addressing clear unmet needs and strong scientific and clinical data are doing well. There hasn't been a let-up investment in those sorts of companies. It's the companies that are perhaps a little earlier or in more of a platform stage that are struggling, and those are not clients of Genesis in any event. But the biotechs that have strong assets, good clinical data, addressing clear unmet needs are doing well from an investment perspective. But there's been a particularly amount of uncertainty that's been injected into the marketplace this year, and with tariffs and international price referencing and things like that. And I think it's important to note that with the Genesis Fit engagement, we can help clients kind of manage some of this uncertainty. And I'll give you an example. I'm going up to meet with a biotech next week who are in late phase for a rare disease, and their executive team has sort of asked me to talk to them about what is the impact of this international price referencing that President Trump wants to put in place on our product, and what are our options, right? Because they would have a U.S. price and a Europe price, and there could be some implications for how they think about that. They're in a place where they haven't launched anything yet, so they can plan for that. But the point of this is, from a broader Genesis perspective, is that we can help manage this uncertainty through the FIT model, because we can bring different sets of experts to bear at different points in their program, despite this uncertainty, or to help manage this uncertainty. And that's very unusual for a consultancy to do, and is very beneficial for the client to address some of this uncertainty. We can get quick payer insights. We can understand the patient journey. We can understand some of what's happening with HTAs, as we talked about earlier. We can get those insights into the client and help design programs and strategies around those, using our FIT engagement model to bring the right experts to bear at the right point in time to address the right question and uncertainty that's just been injected into the system. So it's a really powerful way of engaging with clients, particularly in a period of significant uncertainty.
And when you need to be incredibly adaptive, it sounds like.
That's the whole point, is we can adapt to whatever's happening very, very quickly by bringing the right sorts of people and skill sets to bear at the right time, without sort of saying, "Oh, we got to do a new contract if you guys want to look at that," right? We can just all bring this to bear under our FIT engagement model.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much, David.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Theoretically Speaking, and that you'll tune into future episodes where we chat with pharma value evidence and access experts. Don't forget to subscribe.